everyone! Welcome back to my channel. I'm Amy. Today we explore a group unlike any others in Chinese history, the Imperial Eunuchs. We'll journey to the Han Dynasty, where eunuchs became officially integrated into imperial government, and their power reached an incredible height. What was their life like? And how did they transform from servants into masters of the Han imperial court? Let's find out. The concept of imperial eunuchs serving in the royal courts is ancient, with records suggesting their presence as far back as the Shang dynasty, and more clearly in the later Zhou dynasty. These early eunuchs primarily served as harem guardians and domestic attendants. However, our focus today is the Han dynasty. While powerful individual eunuchs like the infamous Zhao Gao, who helped destroy the Qing dynasty, existed before, it was during the 4 centuries of the Han dynasty that eunuchs began officially integrating into the imperial government in a more systematic way. But before we get into that, what exactly was an imperial eunuch? At the most basic level, eunuchs were castrated men who served in the imperial palace. You may have heard them referred to as gonggo in Chinese dramas, but that was actually a term that was used in later dynasties. In the Han dynasty, they were usually referred to by the palace position that they held, with a general term being huanguan. Their primary responsibility was managing the emperor's inner quarters, especially the vast harem. This included guarding consorts, assisting female attendants, overseeing supplies, and handling the logistics of palace life. They worked where men were generally forbidden, and castration made them, in theory, safe. The imperial rulers needed to make sure that there was no funny business happening in their harem. But wait, while castration might prevent offspring, how can it prevent funny business? That's because castration for imperial eunuchs was more severe than what you may think. The standard operation of castration for imperial eunuchs, known as jingshen or body purification, meant removing all of the external genitals with specialized curved knives. Without anesthesia or antibiotics at the time, this was a very risky procedure. Many bled to death. Others died of infection. Even survivors suffered lifelong side effects. Urination difficulties, lack of facial hair, and if the procedure happened before puberty, a high-pitched voice that never deepened. So why would anyone go through this? Sometimes they had no choice. Castration was used as one of the most severe legal punishments, known as gongxing. A man convicted of serious crime could be sentenced to this fate. One of the most famous examples in Chinese history is Sima Qian, the brilliant historian behind the records of the Grand Historian, or Shi Ji. Around 99 BCE, Sima Qian was serving as Grand Historian when a major political scandal erupted. A general named Li Ling had surrendered to the enemy after a failed campaign. Many at court, including Emperor Wu, viewed this as treason. But Sima Qian defended Li Ling, arguing that he had fought bravely and deserved sympathy, not blame. This enraged the emperor. Sima Qian was accused of slandering the court and deceiving the throne. He was sentenced to death. At this moment, he faced a brutal choice. Execution would have preserved his dignity, but it would also mean the end of his life's work and the betrayal of the legacy his father had entrusted to him. The only alternative was castration, a punishment viewed at the time as worse than death. It stripped a man of his status, his body, and his honor. But Sima Qian chose to live. He underwent the procedure, lost everything that made him a man in the eyes of society, and remained in the palace as a low-ranking eunuch. Enduring shame, pain, and isolation, he spent the rest of his life completing the Shi Ji. Today, it remains one of the most important historical texts ever written in China. His story is one of the most powerful illustrations of what it meant to become a eunuch, not by choice, but by force, and how that identity shaped every part of a man's life afterward. Others were brought in under different circumstances. Prisoners of war, especially from non-Han tribes, were sometimes enslaved and castrated. Some vassal states sent young boys as tribute, intended for palace service. But by the mid to late Han dynasty, the most documented common reason was poverty. Starving families might send a son into the palace in hopes of food and income, Sometimes adults without hope chose the path themselves. Becoming a eunuch was not seen as honorable. It was seen as a desperate gamble, a risk of life and dignity for a hope of survival, or maybe a better future. As the saying goes, sometimes you have to lose something in order to gain something. Inside the palace, emotional relationships were complicated. Historical records from the Han Dynasty, such as the Book of Han, mentioned a term called 对视. This term originally described relationships between palace mates, forming bonds that resembled marriage. While these records focused on female-female pairings, evidence suggests that eunuchs too sought companionship, but were not documented. Whether these relationships were emotional or romantic is difficult to say. But for powerful eunuchs, there was another concern: legacy. Eunuchs could not have sons or wives. This meant they could not establish an ancestral hall for their descendants to honor them. By the standards of Han society, that made them incomplete. In the Confucian worldview, family was everything. Sons honored their fathers, continued the family line, and performed rituals for ancestral spirits. Without a son, a man risked becoming a forgotten ghost, cut off from the cycle of remembrance. For many men in the Han Dynasty, this was a terrible way to go. But for eunuchs, it was their reality. With no sons to carry on their name or perform rituals, how could they avoid the terrible fate of becoming a forgotten spirit? The answer lay in adoption. And for many, adoption was the answer to everything they had lost. A eunuch might adopt a boy from a relative's family or taking in an orphan. These adopted sons were not castrated and could carry on the family name. For the eunuchs, this provided both emotional comfort and social legitimacy. And for the adopted son, it meant a powerful supporter and a path to advancement. One of the most famous examples is Cao Ten, a high-ranking eunuch in the Eastern Han court. Cao Ten adopted Cao Song, who in turn fathered Cao Cao. You might have heard of Cao Cao from the many legends surrounding the Three Kingdoms period. That's right, his adopted grandfather was a eunuch. Cao Cao would become a dominant figure in Chinese history and lay the foundation for the state of Cao Wei. Through adoption, Cao Ten's name lived on not just in ritual, but at the very center of power. Beyond these adoptions for formal lineage, another crucial type of family existed within the eunuch community itself. Powerful senior eunuchs often took promising younger eunuchs under their wing, forming relationships similar to that of a godfather and adopted son. This wasn't about continuing a bloodline, but about building loyalty, consolidating power within their palace factions, and ensuring a succession of influence. The senior eunuch would mentor, protect, and promote his chosen eunuch sons, who in turn offered their service. For eunuchs who gained real power and wealth, adoption was not just a practical solution, it was a way to reclaim part of what had been taken from them. They may have lost the ability to produce heirs, but through carefully chosen sons, they could still leave a legacy, one that would burn incense in their name, one that history would remember. So what was life like for the average Han Dynasty eunuch? In the early Han Dynasty, life for most eunuchs was fairly straightforward. They were trusted with palace duties, but largely excluded from the formal machinery of government. First of all, a eunuch's service is for life. This is quite different from the other service staff of the palace mates. While the Han Dynasty did not have strict palace mate retirement rules like the Qing Dynasty did, and many palace mates did also serve for life, it was still common for palace mates to be released due to old age or imperial decree. Some palace mates were even able to become an imperial concubine, changing their life forever. A typical eunuch's day began before sunrise. Junior eunuchs were expected to have the halls cleaned, lamps refilled, incense lit, and everything prepared before their masters woke up. Those assigned to senior consorts or the emperor himself needed to anticipate every need. They helped dress the royals, serve their meals, monitored their moods, and stood ready to fetch or deliver at a moment's notice. Some eunuchs worked as internal guards. They were posted at palace gates, observing who came and went, controlling access to restricted areas. Others supervised workshops producing silks, bronze, and luxury goods. Many of these duties might seem to overlap with those performed by palace maids, but there was a key difference. Despite their castration, eunuchs were still considered a type of men, which meant they often got assigned to a wider range of tasks across more parts of the palace. On the other hand, palace maids were mostly assigned to serve the empress and other members of the imperial harem, and did not extend into the administrative or security functions of the palace. Life for junior eunuchs was harsh. Meals were basic: rice, vegetables, and a bit of meat on good days. Their wages were minimal. They lived in shared quarters under strict supervision. But for the few who climbed the ranks, life could look very different. A favored eunuch might receive silks, gold, land, or even a private residence within the palace complex. Palace life was based heavily on rank. Senior eunuchs who had served for decades or earned imperial favor held immense authority. They assigned tasks, enforced discipline, and sometimes commended hundreds of subordinates. These elders could be mentors, but just as often they were obstacles to advancement. A eunuch had to be very careful when doing their job. A spilled drink, a wrong word, or even the perception of siding with the wrong court faction could lead to demotion, flogging, or even death. Bamboo caning was a common punishment, along with imprisonment, and if a powerful master fell out of favor, his servants often vanished with him. For most eunuchs, life in the palace meant constant pressure, quiet fear, and survival through obedience. But for some eunuchs, that began to change. At first, during the Western Han, the changes were subtle. Emperors surrounded by competing court factions began turning to eunuchs as trusted allies. Eunuchs were always around and not a part of any court faction. For a cautious emperor, eunuchs were the perfect helpers. Literate eunuchs were especially valuable in these roles. They could serve as private secretaries, handling documents, confidential messengers, or guardians of specific imperial seals within the inner palace. They controlled access to the emperor's person, to his documents, and the flow of information around him. While excluded from high official government positions, some eunuchs started to gain access to real power and influence. By the Eastern Han period, the role of eunuchs had expanded far beyond palace errands and quiet service. As the court grew more fractured and emperors struggled to assert themselves against powerful consort families and empress dowagers, eunuchs began to emerge as a different kind of political force. They were not backed by noble families or other government officials, and could not claim the throne for themselves. That made them loyal, and that made them useful. For the first time, eunuchs started to hold positions with real responsibilities. They were appointed to sensitive roles and given control over internal communications. Some began working within the central government itself, most notably in the Imperial Secretariat. This was a vital branch of government, handling imperial documents, reviewing reports from across the empire, and issuing commands on the emperor's behalf. Control over this system meant control over what the emperor saw and what commands were sent in return. That influence became clear in the case of Zheng Zhong, a eunuch who rose to prominence around 92 CE. At the time, the court was under the tight control of the Dou family, led by Empress Dowager Dou, who was acting as regent for the young Emperor He. However, Emperor He wanted to assert his own power, and Zheng Zhong helped him to do it. In a bold move, they staged a political purge that removed the Dou family from power. For his service, Zheng Zhong was rewarded with the noble title of Liehou, marking the first time a eunuch was officially recognized for his contribution in political conflicts, and rewarded with a status comparable to high officials. But not all eunuch achievements came through court intrigue. One of the most celebrated names from this period is Cai Lun, remembered today for a very different kind of contribution. Around 105 CE, Cai Lun is credited with significantly refining and standardizing the process of papermaking. Using materials like tree bark and hemp, He developed a far more practical and affordable writing service. It lowered the cost of writing, helped spread literacy, and greatly improved government operations. For his service, Emperor He granted Tailun wealth and the title of Longtinghou. Following such precedents, the Han Dynasty saw the official recognition of central regular attendants, 中常侍, as high-ranking eunuch government officials. The central regular attendants had constant access to the emperor and effectively became his personal cabinet, advising him on policies and appointments. Others took charge of imperial workshops, controlling significant economic resources. In some instances, eunuchs were even given command over military forces within the capital itself. Eunuchs became deeply integrated into the entire government system of the Han Dynasty, setting the stage for the upcoming chaos. During the reign of Emperor Huan, the unchecked growth of eunuch power reached a dangerous peak. Influential eunuchs consolidated their positions and formed a powerful, corrupt force within the Eastern Han court. Powerful eunuchs like Cao Ten were no longer simply attendants. They were building massive fortunes, manipulating imperial appointments, and with some even ruthlessly silencing any opposition. Their rise greatly alarmed the Shi Dafu, a term referring to the educated elites of serving officials and respected scholars. The Shi Dafu were trained in Confucian principles and were often from powerful noble families, and saw themselves as the moral backbone of the empire. They recognized that eunuch dominance was dangerous and a threat to everything the Confucian order stood for. At first, Chen Fan and other high ministers petitioned against the eunuchs, asking the emperor to cut off the source of palace favorites interfering in governance. But Emperor Huan ignored this advice, and the eunuchs retaliated. Officials and even common people who sided with the Shi Dafu and condemned eunuch abuses were dismissed or punished, with many dying in prison. The Shi Dafu response was a movement known as Qingyi, or pure criticism. This was not a violent rebellion. It was a public moral campaign. Officials began openly criticizing corrupt eunuchs and their allies. Imperial University students in Luoyang posted critiques on palace walls. High-ranking ministers submitted petitions exposing abuse of power. The goal was to apply so much pressure that the imperial court would be forced to act. The movement gained momentum. Scholars like Fan Pang, known for his integrity, refused to recommend corrupt individuals for office. Others like Li Ying led investigations into and punished the relatives of powerful eunuchs who broke the law. These actions were direct challenges. These Shi Dafu created a network of like-minded officials, united by the belief that the empire could still be reformed. For a brief moment, it seemed like they might succeed. But the eunuchs struck back. They could not defeat the scholars in open debate, so they used their influence at court to accuse them of forming illegal factions, claiming they were plotting to overthrow the emperor. The charge was 党人 or partisan, implying secret alliances, sedition, and a threat to the imperial authority. The eunuchs submitted a formal accusation. This accusation enraged Emperor Huan and became the justification for a brutal series of purges, now remembered as the 党锢之祸, or the partisan prohibitions. The first purge struck around 166 CE with ordered arrests of the so-called partisans. Chen Fan protested the lack of clear charges and refused to endorse the arrest warrants. But Emperor Huan bypassed him by assigning the eunuch-controlled northern prison to handle the case. Li Ying, Fan Pang, and other Shi Dafu endured torture in prison without recanting. Eventually, a general pardon was declared in 167 CE when the arrested partisans were released, but stripped of official rank and forced into political exile. This was but the calm before the storm. In 168 CE, Emperor Huan died, and the young Emperor Ling ascended the throne. Great General Dou Wu and Chen Fan saw an opportunity and plotted to remove the eunuchs once and for all. But the eunuchs found out. They acted swiftly and launched a brutal coup. The Empress Dowager was imprisoned. Dou Wu and Chen Fan were arrested and executed. Their supporters were wiped out. With their main opponents eliminated, the eunuchs started a second partisan prohibition in 169 CE. This wave of persecution was even more brutal and widespread. New accusations were leveled, and a new round of arrests swept through the empire. Li Ying, Fan Pang were arrested again, and along with hundreds of other prominent Shidafu were executed in prison. The Book of Later Han records Fan Pang telling his son before being arrested, "Treacherous ministers are now in power, and our country is in danger. If I were to evade my fate, who would then act for righteousness?" Many more were exiled, imprisoned, or ruined by association, with the prohibitions extending to students, relatives, and associates. The second partisan prohibition crushed the Shidafu movement. What began as a moral campaign ended in blood. The scholar official had lost. The eunuchs had won. When no one left to challenge them, the eunuchs tightened their grip on the court. Corruption deepened. The bureaucracy hollowed out. And the empire moved one step closer to collapse. With the eunuchs managing daily governance, Emperor Ling found that life was far more enjoyable when focusing on personal pleasures. This detachment created a power vacuum, readily filled by a group of powerful and corrupt eunuchs, infamously nicknamed 十常侍, or 10 attendants. Ironically, the 10 attendants actually comprised of 12 eunuchs that held the rank of central regular attendant, led by Zhang Rang and Zhao Zhong. Their grip on power was so complete that Emperor Ling reportedly declared, "Attendant Zhang is my father, and Attendant Zhao is my mother." With such unshakable imperial favor, the 10 attendants ran the court from behind the scenes. They isolated the emperor, dictated access to his presence, and ensured every decree served their own interests. They weren't just attendants, they were shadow rulers. Their corruption was so shameless, official posts were sold openly, often to the highest bidder. This included civil offices, military commands, and provincial governorships. Competence no longer mattered. All that mattered was money. Those who bought power recouped their losses through bribery and extortion, plunging the local administration into chaos. Local resentment deepened, but the court remained silent. Outside the capital, natural disasters struck with growing frequency. Floods, droughts, and famine swept across the countryside. In Confucian political thought, this was more than misfortune. It was a warning. Heaven was no longer on the side of the imperial court. In 184 CE, the breaking point arrived in the form of the Yellow Turban Rebellion, a massive, religiously inspired peasant uprising. This rebellion was led by the three brothers Zhang Jue, Zhang Bao, and Zhang Liang. They preached a form of Taoism known as the Way of Great Peace, Taiping Dao, that promised a new beginning and wore yellow scarves or turbans on their heads. Millions across multiple provinces rose up, attacking government offices and officials, plunging the empire into widespread civil war. One brave official dared to name the cause. Zhang Jun submitted a scathing petition to Emperor Ling. He blamed the 10 attendants. Emperor Ling showed the petition to the eunuchs, who naturally denied everything and engineered Zhang Jun's imprisonment and death. The 10 attendants won this time. However, even though the rebellion was eventually stopped, lasting damage was done. The misrule and corruption of the 10 attendants was exposed for all to see. In Emperor Ling's final years, he created a new military force that was loyal directly to the throne. This was the West Garden Army, and command was granted to Jian Shuo, another powerful eunuch that was not a part of the 10 attendants. It is not clear why he did this, but many suspect it is because he was finally recognizing the corruption and unchecked power of the 10 attendants. Or maybe it was because he was concerned with the ambition of certain officials, such as the general He Jing, who was the empress's brother. In 189 CE, Emperor Ling passed away, and the balance of the court was shattered. Emperor Ling left behind two young sons, Liu Bian, who was born by Empress He, and the younger Liu Xie, who was born from a consort. Emperor Ling favored Liu Xie, but died before officially naming an heir, instead entrusting Liu Xie to Jian Shuo, bypassing the 10 attendants and court officials. With Emperor Ling dead, He Jing moved to secure the throne for his nephew Liu Bian. With Liu Bian on the throne, the He family's power would be solidified and He Jing's own position would become dominant. They would finally be able to take imperial power back away from the eunuchs. Jian Shuo understood that He Jing's success would not only mean failure to fulfill Emperor Ling's last wish, but also his own likely destruction. He determined that he had to eliminate He Jing first, and asked the 10 attendants for help. Surprisingly, the 10 attendants determined that Jian Shuo was more of a threat to them than He Jing was. It turns out that the 10 attendants had a good relationship with the He family, having even helped the He family gain favor in the past, and did not believe that the He family would turn against them. They warned He Jing of the plan when he came to meet with Jian Shuo, alarming him and allowing him to escape. A few days later, He Jing made his move and installed Liu Bian as Empress Shao. Empress He was named Empress Dowager, and He Jing took control of the court. His first act was to settle scores with Jian Shuo, who was arrested and executed. The West Garden Army was then absorbed into the He forces. But He Jing wasn't finished. With Jian Shuo gone, he now turned his attention to the 10 attendants. His ally, Yuan Shao, a charismatic nobleman, pushed for a full purge. The eunuchs, he argued, had to be removed, completely and permanently. However, Empress Dowager He resisted, stating, "Eunuchs have managed the inner palace affairs from ancient times. This Han tradition cannot be abolished. Besides, the late emperor had just passed away. How can I, in proper attire, deal with scholar officials directly?" So He Jing tried a different approach. Yuan Shao advised him to summon military commanders from outside the capital, such as Dong Zhuo, to pressure the court. Cao Cao warned that inviting external armies was dangerous, but He Jing chose to follow Yuan Shao's advice. He Jing hoped the threat of outside force would intimidate the Empress Dowager into giving her approval. It was a fatal mistake. The eunuchs learned that was coming and would not die without resistance. In 189 CE, He Jing entered the Changle Palace to again demand the execution of the eunuchs, but was ambushed. Zhang Rang and Zhao Zhong confronted him directly. "The chaos in the empire is not solely our crime. We even saved the Empress Dowager, all to gain your family's favor. Now you seek to kill us all? Isn't this too much?" And with that, He Jing was killed. The 10 attendants then issued a false edict, attempting to reclaim their power and secure the palace. When court officials demanded He Jing's appearance, a eunuch threw his severed head over the palace wall, declaring He Jing plotted rebellion and has been executed. This was a terrible miscalculation. He Jing's followers were enraged and immediately stormed the palace. Zhang Rang and the other eunuchs were shocked by the violent reaction and fled the palace with the young Emperor Shao and his brother Liu Xie. Yuan Shao took control of the palace and began the slaughter of eunuchs. Any man without a beard was suspect. It's said over 2,000 were killed, many of which were not eunuchs at all. The remaining 10 attendants with Emperor Shao and Liu Xie managed to escape the palace on foot. Unfortunately, they were surrounded and cornered on the banks of the Yellow River. Knowing that they have no chance of survival, the eunuchs bid a final farewell to the emperor. "We will die, Your Majesty. Take care of yourself." Then they threw themselves into the river and drowned. Emperor Shao and Liu Xie were recovered by the pursuing soldiers and brought back to Luoyang. However, this rescue did not come with freedom. Dong Zhuo has arrived, and the cost of inviting an external army must now be paid. Without a strong leader to fill the gap left by He Jing's death, Dong Zhuo and his powerful army quickly took control of the capital from He Jing's remaining forces. With the eunuchs faction eliminated and the imperial court in disarray, Dong Zhuo saw an opportunity to take over the entire empire. He deposed Emperor Shao and installed the younger and more easily controlled Liu Xie as Emperor Xian, who becomes the last emperor of the Han dynasty. He Jing's officials and followers, such as Yuan Shao and Cao Cao, were forced to flee Luoyang and began building their own factions as a counter against Dong Zhuo's control of the capital and the imperial court. Surviving eunuchs were kept under tight control by these new masters. Their roles largely reverted to purely service functions, stripped of the high-level political access that they once had. The new nobles and military leaders in charge had to ensure that no eunuch faction could threaten their newfound power and authority ever again. While the corrupt eunuchs were gone, the new rulers of the imperial court offered no healing for the empire. Instead, powerful nobles and officials scrambled to seize power, tearing it further apart and setting the stage for the legendary epic of the Three Kingdoms period. As the curtains fall on the rule of the 10 attendants, the story of the Han Dynasty also draws to a close. The path of a eunuch was definitely a hard one, but the Han Dynasty created opportunities for eunuchs to rise to greatness. With great power comes great responsibility, and when the eunuchs failed to fulfill their responsibility, the entire dynasty collapsed. But were the eunuchs solely to blame, or were they just an excuse? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed exploring eunuchs in the Han Dynasty with me today, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to support this channel and help me uncover more fascinating stories from Chinese history, please consider joining my membership and becoming a Noble Baobab. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Stay curious, stay magical.